Warning. The following program is a satirical look at Indigenous news, politics, and current events. Hipster racism is advised.
Anin bonjour and welcome to the Laughing Drum, my friends, television. So yes, thank you. The Laughing Drum is television so deeply and profoundly Indigenous, white girls dress as us and then go to music festivals. I am your host, Tim Fontaine, and this week we are at the Toronto Sketch Comedy Festival for the first time ever. Yes! Thank you, you sweet, glorious you. We have got an exciting show tonight. Like I said, it's the first time that we're doing this in front of a live audience, and if you're not familiar with this show, that's fine. We'll walk you through it. It just means that you're not serious about reconciliation, but that's okay. That's all right. That's all right. We'll explain everything and do all the heavy lifting, as usual. So don't worry about it. But what is the Laughing Drum? The Laughing Drum at its heart is a panel show that draws its material from the week's headlines, like the trap lines of old, right? So this week, we're going to find out what's been happening on the trap line and see what's been happening on the news. We begin in politics, where good things so rarely happen. And the SNC-Lavalin affair that just keeps on affairing. The latest development, the Liberals have shut down an emergency meeting looking into the whole thing. The meeting had been called by Conservative and NDP MPs who want former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to testify again. You remember her. She was the First Nations woman who dropped an atomic bombshell on Ottawa last week. That one. Well, she had testified for over 4 hours a few weeks back, naming names and accusing the Prime Minister of pressuring her to strike a deal with SNC-Lavalin. That company is facing bribery charges for some kind of deal that involves Libya and Gaddafi and sex workers. It's a big, long story. I don't really want to go into it right now, but the Liberals seem to have a real soft spot, or a hard spot perhaps, for this company because it employs a lot of people or something. So when they shut down the emergency meeting, opposition MPs went ballistic and accused the Liberals of a cover-up. The Liberals, meanwhile, are basically saying that Wilson-Raybould has said enough and that it's time for a shift in the discussion. And by shift, I guess they mean anything but that topic. Now, I know, guys, this shit is boring, but it's all we got right now. It is the only thing in the news right now. It is like the sexiest scandal we have, and that is so very, very sad. It's either this or we talk about tariffs, and I'm not that, I'm sorry. But what does any of this have to do with Indigenous people? Why are we talking about this on this show? Well, to tell us why is the Laughing Drum's Elissa Kixen. Please give it up for Elissa Kixen, regular Laughing Drum contributor. All right, Elissa, what's going on? How do Indigenous people view this scandal?
It's pretty f***ed up, Tim. Everything's all topsy-turvy. The right is left, the left is right, and the Conservatives are champions.
Are you serious?
I can't keep up.
Are they our friends, though?
I think they are, and it's a little creepy. Do you know they started a website? This is how woke the Conservatives are. They started a website in support of Jody Wilson-Raybould, and it's called LetHerSpeakOut.ca. I think this is the first time in history that Conservatives have ever cared about what Indigenous women have to say.
Well, I think to be fair, the Conservatives did have Indigenous cabinet ministers.
Oh yeah? When? When was that?
I don't know, like 10 years ago maybe.
And where is she now?
I don't know.
Damn rights you don't.
So how are Indigenous people viewing the Liberals then?
I don't know. The Liberals, they're kind of like our drunk aunt, you know, the drunk white aunt who marries onto the res. And then now she thinks that it gives her permission to like make Indigenous jokes, get her spirit name. That's how I view the Liberals.
Are people, like, is this, we're 6 months away from an election.
Yeah.
Is this going to affect them in the polls?
I don't know. Like, it's not like all Indigenous people are all of a sudden going to be like, oh yes, conservative. That's they care about me. I mean, we all heard Romeo Saganash.
Yeah. Does that mean people are going to vote NDP? What about Green?
Maybe.
That's the sort of cutting insight you're going to see on this show tonight. Thank you very much, Elissa. All right, guys. We got to take a short break, but when we come back, you're going to meet the Red Power panel. So don't go away or we're going to lose our funding. All right, my friends, welcome back to the Laughing Drum, and I am here at the Toronto Comedy Sketch Festival. Thank you very much for inviting us to the show. Yes, I was a little overdone that time, but it's okay. I forgive you guys. So, if you've ever watched political shows, political panel shows, and you've ever thought that they weren't saying the right things or that they were being a little too polite, well, these people here are your voice. This is TV's most Indigenous team of pundits you will ever see. Tonight, the Red Power panel is Craig Lauzon, an actor and comic who you probably recognize from the Royal Canadian Air Force, and he's a veteran of the stage. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you for having me.
Candy Palmater, who's far too smart for this show, is a Mi'kmaq lawyer, comic, and writer who you probably recognize from The Candy Show on APTN. Welcome, Candy. Candy was a show regular before. We're very, very glad to have you back. And Kaniehtiio Horn is a Mohawk actor who has appeared on shows like Hemlock Grove and, of course, Letterkenny. She's also the producer of Coffee with My Ma, which is an absolutely incredible podcast you're going to have to check out. Welcome, you guys. All right, Red Power panel. I want you to go back to a simpler time, a couple of weeks ago. And that was when Jody Wilson-Raybould, the country's first Indigenous Justice Minister and Attorney General, appeared before a Commons committee looking into the SNC-Lavalin affair and dropped political atomic bomb after political atomic bomb. What were your first thoughts when you saw this?
Well, I will jump right in. I'm going to go back to even before that. In fact, I was tweeting one night, and a guy that grew up just down the road from me, a white guy who my mother used to clean his mother's house, was dressing me down, saying that I was lying because I was referring to where I grew up as the wilds of northern New Brunswick, and he didn't think it was the wilds. And I went back to him as politely as possible and said, well, my white friend whose house used to be cleaned by my mother, whose mother had an education and a driver's license, and who got to town every day of the week. When I went to town only on Saturday, when my mother and I would walk because my mother didn't have a driver's license, maybe, just maybe, our perspective of where we came from was a little different, just a little different. And I think what happened in government is exactly that. I think JT, coming from the most privileged political family in the country, did what has always been done, the way the boys have been doing it for years. But what he failed to think about is that an Indigenous woman holding a place of power like that has got a whole different problem on our hands in terms of there are people right now who saying they support her who were calling for her head 6 months ago.
Yes.
Don't think the Conservatives love her. They don't love her. They're just looking for a way to get government out of power. But what's happening, I think, is both of them are telling their own truth. But nobody is looking at the fact that the truth of an Indigenous woman and the truth of a white boy who was raised by a former prime minister are two completely different truths.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Now, I want to get into that a bit more, because before all of this scandal broke, you're right, there was a lot of people that wouldn't give her the time of day, and now everybody, it's like hashtag Team Jody.
Yeah, and don't think if she hadn't gone along,
Yeah.
and we still found out about the whole controversy, they'd be throwing her under the bus quicker than you could say Jody Wilson-Raybould.
They'd have thrown her under the bus quicker than they already did.
Yes.
Yeah.
One way or another, Jody was going to end up under the bus. And thus is the problem of politics in Canada.
Yeah. But how did this become, like, other than the fact that the key player is Indigenous, how did this become an Indigenous story?
Yeah,
Like, why is so much tied into this?
Well, you know, when it first came out, I don't feel like, other than the fact that she is Indigenous, like the story itself wasn't an Indigenous story until the Conservatives and other people made it an Indigenous story, like Sheila Kopp saying, if it had been in 9,000 Indigenous jobs, which I don't even know what she means by that.
Seriously?
Or that she doesn't think Indigenous people work at SNC-Lavalin. Like, that's kind of ridiculous. But they turned it into an Indigenous story to serve their means, like you were saying. Like, the Conservatives don't give a shit if she's... they're loving the fact that it's like when they're talking about the Washington football team, they always get the two guys that say, yeah, I don't mind that they call it the Redskins and they're chiefs of their tribe. It's like... That's how it feels, is that they don't really care. They're just happy that she is knocking him down a peg, and they're getting behind her for that.
Okay, let's get serious for a second here. Now, on a scale of a shirtless Graham Greene in Dances with Wolves to a naked Gary Farmer in Powwow Highway, how sexy is this scandal?
Not very sexy. I feel like the Americans are probably looking at this scandal going, oh, Canada's so cute. I mean, he just tried to pressure her to do something she didn't want to do, and she didn't do it, and now it's a scandal. Oh, it's adorable.
It's not as sexy as menopausal me sweating between the breasts right now.
Pretty sexy.
But I agree. You know, United States, I'm sure they look at us crying about this, going, seriously, want to trade?
Yeah.
I'm sure they would take Justin in a heartbeat if they could trade.
Yeah, or the UK is going, what?
Seriously.
It's a scandal.
Yeah.
It's a scandal.
Yeah. And imagine, right? Because if you're watching what's happening with poor Prime Minister May, and you're watching the Jody thing, like if you want to know how to raise kids properly, do not let them watch C-SPAN. Like that is not good. Just screaming at one another and throwing things, and it's not.
I have always wanted to say that in the show, and I finally got to do it. Order! Shut your lips, man!
There you go.
So what elements could you add to the story to make it more sexy?
Well,
Let's sex it up.
slept with somebody.
Hey?
It would have been so much cooler if somebody slept with somebody to push it, and it would have been even better if like the people who slept with somebody were like really not attractive, like not shaggable to begin with. Like, do you know what I mean? That would have been so Canadian, right? Like somebody with like long hair on their legs, and like some dude that's just not really like super shaggable, and then they've had sex, and that's why SNC-Lavalin was like off the hook. Like that would have been really. I think that would have been cool. And I'm looking at some of the people in cabinet, and I'm thinking, that could have been so funny. That could have been really funny. Yeah, it's super sexy.
Okay.
Super sexy.
We often hear reconciliation, and it's a word that gets tossed around quite a bit these days. Is this story and the treatment of Jody Wilson-Raybould in any way a reflection of where we are in terms of reconciliation?
Well, I'll be serious for a second and say that that yes, it is a representation of where we are.
Yeah.
But I also feel very seriously that we are missing a key opportunity. This is a perfect opportunity to really look at perspective and how perspective, because we can't talk about diversity and inclusion and representative government if we don't talk about the fact that perceptions are different when you bring different people together.
We do shit different.
And this would be a real opportunity to actually have this be a reconciliation moment. But that's not going to happen because they are not grown-ups.
Yeah.
They are a bunch of kids on the schoolyard saying, no, you made that mess. No, you made that mess.
Yeah. Dio, you're a young person.
Oh my God. Am I?
Do you think Canadians or Indigenous communities are watching this story as much as we are? Because we're all people that watch news, I'm assuming, otherwise you wouldn't be.
I mean, I didn't really pay attention to her until started going down.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, who is this lady? And then like my mom schooled me on who her dad was and everything. And I was like, well, you go, girl. We should, like, you know, she's just not taking right? And
Yeah.
she's right. We approach everything differently. This whole system was imposed on us. So I admire her for jumping in the system, getting up there, and then saying no when she was uncomfortable to do something. I think she handled it like an Indigenous woman should.
There we go.
That's what I was going to say. When you were talking about whether or not it was an Indigenous issue or a story, I was like, initially I felt like it was more about the fact that she was a female and they thought that they could push her around.
Yeah.
What they didn't take into account was that she was an Indigenous female, and that don't fly. It's like, you know, they'll give, you know, it's, yeah.
Those kinds of shufflings have happened in government forever. But they have to understand that people read things differently, and that, yeah, I remember the day she was named, and I cried. As an Indigenous lawyer, an Indigenous woman finally being the top lawyer in this country, that was huge for me. Yeah. And when she got shuffled out, I remember thinking then, she didn't toe the party line on something. Yeah. I wonder what it was. And now it's, of course, all come to the forefront. But what he doesn't realize is when you shuffle out one of your golfing buddies, there isn't like this whole population of people whose hopes and dreams are pinned on this individual. So when she gets shuffled out, it's not casual. It's not the way it has been for the last however many years. When you put someone that significant in a role that significant, here's a conversation we all should be having. Attorney General, maybe that should not be a partisan position. Maybe that should be independent of government.
Yeah. We're going to get into that after the break, but we do have to take a quick break. So stay tuned, go fix yourself some tea and some bannock, and when we come back, you're going to hear more from the Red Power panel. And welcome back to the Laughing Drum, my friends. Television so exquisitely Indigenous. Elizabeth Warren took a DNA test and now she claims she's us. This week, we are live at the Toronto Comedy Sketch Festival, and we are so excited to be here. And I am here, as always, with the Red Power panel. And before the break, we were talking about the SNC-Lavalin affair. It's pronounced affair. It's an affair. And we were talking about whether we should split certain parts of the government, because that's what we talk about at sketch comedy festivals, apparently. Is this going to change Canada? Is this whole thing with Jody Wilson-Raybould, is this going to change Canada?
I hope so.
Yeah?
I hope she shakes shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she has. She has. And I mean, she's gotten, I think, Indigenous people kind of paying attention, like, oh, who's this lady who's kind of, you know, in there. She always looks good, too. Can I just say that? She always looks so, like, put together. Like, but yeah, I think she's shaking it up. I think she's making Indigenous people kind of, like, tune in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Candy, what do you think?
I think 3 months from now, nobody will remember.
Yeah?
I think Meech Lake happened, and we all thought that was going to be the change, and then we went back to business as usual. And the Charlottetown Accord happened, and we went back to business as usual. And I remember even a couple of years ago...
I think it's a different time, though.
Yeah, well, the Bushi decision came down, and everybody said, now this is going to be the difference. And I was giving a talk at a university. Somebody said, why is this different? I said, it's not. 6 months from now, nobody's going to be talking about this anymore. And some Indigenous kid in the back said, do you think that's true? I said, you tweet me 6 months from today, and we're going to talk about how much we see in the news. It wasn't even 6 months. It was 3 months, and it was forgotten and gone. In terms of the national stage, would I love to see it change things up? Yes. Do I think it's going to? No. I think when every Canadian gets on a street corner and threatens to not pay their taxes or burn down a building unless Indigenous people have potable water, that's when change is going to happen. That's when it's going to happen. Our 6%...
Craig?
I mean, it's one of those things where a certain thing happens, like you gave the examples, and you hope that that's the thing that's going to make it change. And like to think that it's going to change because it's happening in Parliament, it's happening with politicians, it's not something happening in a community somewhere, it's like actually happening in Ottawa on the Hill. And you'd like to think that that's going to make a change, and maybe it will, but history sort of dictates that that's not the case.
These are bummers.
Yeah.
I didn't think it's going to change, okay?
No, I wanted to,
I
but I
believe
just
in the
don't.
youth, and
I'm
I
too
think...
cynical to believe.
I believe the children.
Exactly,
No,
thank you.
They can't pay for the
They don't
free
have the
royalties. No, trust me, can't clear that song.
8 bars, I think was. Well, yeah, you want it to be, and I hope that it is. I just have my. It's like when Trudeau got elected. You know, everybody, there was like rejoicing in the streets of, you know, most reserves were like, yeah, this is going to be awesome. He seems to be speaking for us.
And I said, we'll see.
I was like cautiously optimistic. And, you know, we see every year it's just been, you know, all the things that he was saying that he was going to do or change hasn't happened.
Yeah. Okay, let's get serious again for a second.
Pipeline.
Yeah. In the inevitable CBC or CTV movie version of this scandal, who is going to play who? Who could play?
Her.
Yeah?
Can I play Jody?
Yes, let's say
Thank
that.
you. So I'm going to play her.
Who's going to play Trudeau? I'm looking at you, Craig.
Well,
You could play Trudeau.
it's true.
Except I am prettier and smarter than he is.
I have played Trudeau on Air Farce.
Yes, you have.
And so I would like to. But I will say this about our fair Prime Minister. When I had been playing him on the show and we tried to get him on, this is before he got elected, he said that he wished he could. He couldn't at the time. He was too busy doing something. But he wished he could because the person that they had playing him was too fat. And I said, you son of a... Not even kidding. I still have the email.
I'm so not surprised.
Yeah. And I believe that his wife is bulimic. So that's even like double whammy for him being an...
Just for the audience, because I know we can't say it on TV, but just for you, Justin, we'd have to tie across a board across your arse to keep it falling in anyway. So it's all right. It's all right. Big girls don't need you. Big girls don't need you.
But yeah, I can play him.
Yeah.
I play him and, you know, do it justice. see what
You know what, that mustache?
Not even sure why.
One last question. Who's going to play Andrew Scheer?
Andrew Scheer. Well, I also play Andrew Scheer. And he went to my high school, and my mother was a teacher at my high school. She probably won't watch this, but she didn't like him. And my mom loves everybody. But who could play him? Who's someone that nobody likes?
Let Johnny Depp play him. He's still trying to figure he's still trying to figure out if he's an Indian or a pilot. A pirate. Yeah. Yes.
Benedict Cumberbatch is. Yeah. All right, guys. I think we're almost out of time for this episode, but I'm going to give you some for coming on my show. You see them over there? I'm stepping all over my mics here. This is.
Oh yeah.
This, my friend, all guests on my show receive a can of Laughing Drum canned luncheon meat.
Nice.
I've been waiting for this.
It actually has a key. On that canned meat note, my friends, I think that's all the time. That's all the time we have for this episode of The Laughing Drum. Thank you so much to the Toronto Comedy Sketch Festival for having us here. Thank you to the Red Power panel, and for all of you for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week, guys.